I'm Brit Bingold, and you are listening to Season 3 of Learning Unlocked. Educators are the key holders to unlocking learning for students. Today, as always, my goal is to provide you with resources and tools, the keys, to enable and accelerate learning for all students. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get started. Hey key holders, welcome to episode 24 of Learning Unlocked. I'm so excited to have my guest on today. It is Matt Moix, and he is our current coordinator of psychological services for our district, and he has held that role since August of 2018. He grew up in Arkansas and attended his undergrad at Arkansas State University, and then earned his PhD in school psychology from the University of Memphis in 2000. At that time, his family moved to Gilbert, and he's been in our district and our communities since August of 2000, serving as a school psychologist at multiple campuses, both elementary and high school. And today we're going to be talking about mental health and the effects of that on learning, as well as weaving in some social emotional learning in order to help those students. There is some crossover between the two, but they are starkly different. And so I think this is a great conversation to have at the beginning of the year as we start to build those relationships and make those connections with students in our classroom. So I hope you enjoy our conversation, and here is my interview with Matt. Hi Matt, how are you doing today?
Hey Britt, doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I am enjoying our rain and monsoon kind of season that's a little bit later than it normally is, so that makes me happy. I know other people in parts of the country probably think we're nuts when we love rain, but us Arizonans somewhat enjoy it, I think.
Absolutely. It brings the temperature down and it's kind of nice.
Yeah, it's different for us than our sunny days, so I think we take advantage of the sunny days. So I'm really excited to have you on today because I love talking about the brain and the way the brain works, and I think it is more important than ever to end that stigma of mental health and the effects on mental health. But before we get into that, I really would love to hear your story about how did you get into this profession?
Well, it's kind of a convoluted story. I actually went to college and I was going to be a pharmacist, but that didn't last very long. And then I fell back on psychology because I enjoyed it in high school. But psychology is one of those undergrad degrees that you can't do a whole lot with. So I had to pick a field of study coming out of undergrad to go into for grad school. And one of my undergrad professors knew I liked working with kids and suggested school psychology, which I had never heard of, honestly, until that point. We didn't have school psychologists in my schools growing up, and I didn't even know what it was. But when he described it and what it was, that sounded good to me. So I went to grad school at the University of Memphis and got my PhD in school psychology, and my wife and I found our way to Arizona 21 years ago. And so I've been in Gilbert since that time, worked at all different levels, preschool through high school. And then a few years ago, took this job as the lead psychologist supervising all the school psychologists in the district.
That's awesome. Okay, so you wanted to be a pharmacist, I wanted to be a dental hygienist, and here we are. It is what it is, right? Everybody's got a different story, and I like hearing how we get to the places that we are, because I think it's important background information for our listeners for sure. So psychology led you into the schools, and so I'm sure
Yes.
you've had so much experience. You said K through 12 with kids, struggling with trauma and anxiety and depression and all of those types of things.
Absolutely.
So can you, just before we start, can you tell me your definition of mental health? Like, in your opinion, how would you describe that?
So that's an interesting question, and it's a broad one. Mental health means different things to different people. And most people think of mental health, and the first thing they think of are psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or depression. But mental health, to me anyway, is much broader than that. It certainly contains those components, but it's also about mental well-being and being emotionally healthy and being in a good headspace, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I think it contains all of that as well.
Yeah. And so when we don't have a diagnosed kiddo, student in our class, right? But we see things like they're sad a lot. They don't make friends. They struggle with routines. They don't feel good regularly. Those are things that as a teacher
Sure.
are kind of red flags, right?
Because they could be symptomatic of a condition that's diagnosable. They could be symptomatic of a physical condition. But what they could also be is just a kid who's not very happy and is struggling with stress in their life, dealing with trauma at home. It may not be something that they would ever get a diagnosis or a diagnostic code from a psychiatrist for, but that doesn't mean they don't need support and don't need help, that we can, as educators, we can help with.
Right. So let's say we have a student and we're noticing, okay, we don't have a diagnosis of this child. There's no, nothing on them, in our Infinite Campus is what we use or whatever we get. What would you suggest for the teacher? Would they go to the school counselor, find the school psychologist, talk to the kid first? What would the steps be for an educator who's noticing a kid who is completely sleep deprived, doesn't seem to be well adjusted, just has a very low self-esteem? Obviously as a teacher, you've probably already done as many things as you could to build them up in your classroom for them to feel like they have good self-efficacy and a good self-concept, but none of it's working. Where do they go from there? Because I remember as a teacher just feeling like I don't really know how to address this, with the student, with the parents, with what do I do?
That's another great question. So backing up a little bit, you said that you, as a teacher, you would have already done a lot of different things to try to build them up, and that's fantastic because kids are much more likely to open up to a teacher or at least express to a teacher that they're struggling than some strange guy like me who calls them down to their office, right?
Well, and a lot of my kids would do it in their writing, right? Because I was an English teacher, so we would have, all of a sudden I'd get this journal prompt or something, and I'm like, oh, well, that's not, you know what I mean? So, and then you get that, do I escalate this? Do I pull the kid? It kind of put me, because I don't have a psychology background, really. I took the child psychology one course I was supposed to take as a educator. I'm
sure.
like, I need help. So for the listeners that are educators, what do we do?
Well, and so you would definitely have made a connection with a kid. We don't want you doing counseling or providing support.
Right. Yeah.
But you should kind of seek out the members of the behavioral health team on your campus. So at an elementary level, you got a school psychologist, you've got a school social worker, even the nurse or the health assistant. They may know about the student already. At the secondary level, same deal. You got a school psychologist, you've got guidance counselors, you have mental health counselors, school nurse. So all those people are members of a behavioral health team. And so they're definitely involved in keeping tabs on kids who are struggling, providing support when necessary. So they may be aware of the student already, but if they're not, they definitely need to know that you've got a student who's struggling, who's expressing concerns about their mental health, who isn't doing well in school for one reason or another. And so you start with a conversation with them and come up with the best plan of action.
Okay. That's good to know. Because, I think as teachers, our hearts go out to the kids. That's why we're in the profession. And so we want to be the fixers, I guess, or the toolbox. And I think we need to let the professionals be the toolbox and let us maybe sometimes just be what my husband and I call the tissue or the bucket, for the student, let them just get it out, but let the professionals handle maybe some of the other things that need to go on with the student and the family.
And that's absolutely true. But as a teacher, teachers are going to play a huge role in that, in talking to the student about being open to accepting that help from other people.
Okay.
Because the student, either through their writing or through a conversation, is opened up to that teacher, so they clearly have trust in that teacher.
Right.
But especially at a high school level, they likely haven't formed a bond with the school psychologist or the school guidance counselor, at least not yet. And so that teacher can serve as the bridge for, hey, you're telling me some stuff I'm kind of concerned about. I've got a great person you can talk to about that.
Yeah.
And so,
and you can say, you can always talk to me, but I really want you to be talking to this person. Okay. Yep. So that's great. That's perfect. I really wanted to just start with that, because I always felt, I always did go to those people, but I know there's a lot of teachers that, especially new teachers, get cases like this or students like this, and they're like, oh my, like, I don't know what my first, course of action is. So, and sometimes it is quite immediate, that you need to get that student help very quickly. So yeah,
absolutely.
That's great to know. Okay. So let's talk about, now that we talked about mental health, and it doesn't have to be diagnosed, like you said, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, whatever. It could be any of those things that we're seeing with kids. And especially coming off of a pandemic, and just the whole back and forth between remote learning and in-person learning. What are the effects of mental health on students' learning, like in the classroom?
Well, there can be quite a few effects from mental health on how they're performing in the classroom, and they can be really severe. So if you've got a student who's, back to the diagnosed conditions, has depression, for example, their motivation wanes significantly. They don't feel up to completing assignments. It's hard to even come to school. And so that's like the obvious example. You're only seeing a student 2 or 3 days a week, and when they are there, their head's on their desk and they just aren't engaging. But it may not be quite that severe, but the effects can be the same if you've got a student who's dealing with stress all the time. Their anxiety is really high, so they're constantly in a state of worrying and thinking about everything and overthinking, and so they can't get anything done because they're hyper vigilant on everything that's going on in their life, whether it's school or home or a combination thereof. So when all of that's playing a role, students are having trouble focusing on algebra, for example.
Right. Like that's like the least of their issues at that
right,
point,
exactly.
Right?
I was going to say another way that it impacts you at school is if you're stressed all the time, odds are you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not getting enough exercise, and so that those physical effects play a role as well, and it all starts to kind of snowball. And then unfortunately, when you start to fall behind, or students start to fall behind, then they get even more anxious about the fact that they're further behind, and that hole just gets deeper and deeper and deeper, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's just a big spiral down, right?
Exactly.
So I've seen all over social media during this past year more than ever, like Maslow over Bloom. Can you kind of go into that a little bit with me? I think teachers are recognizing this in their students, which is a good thing, but what are we speaking to when we talk about Maslow over Bloom?
So when we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and most educators will remember from early on their educational psychology classes, you've got the pyramid where the physical safety and the physiological needs are at the bottom of the pyramid, and you've got to meet those needs before you can even get to the top of the pyramid where you're talking about self-actualization. So when you're saying Maslow over Bloom, they're really talking about those physiological needs, the safety needs, feeling like the students are in a safe place before you can even get to Bloom's taxonomy and worry about learning and education and again, algebra or
right.
English.
Skills and standards and
right.
Concepts. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Okay, so mental health kind of falls then in those lower levels, right?
Absolutely. Well, I already mentioned the physiological needs or the physiological impact that stress and anxiety and worry can have. Um, but it's bigger than that. It's just that sense of safety and feeling like I'm okay. Um, because if you don't feel like you're okay, then you're certainly not concentrating on your academic tasks and homework and everything else.
So, as a teacher, if I'm noticing a kid that, and I've experienced this even as a student myself, but I've had students that have had real high anxiety or stress levels, and even depression. As a teacher, are there some strategies that I can use to help know where they're at? Because I think a lot of teachers, if you see a kid with a head down, might think, oh, they're just not paying attention, they're lazy, they're always, they're a behavior issue. But when they're under the surface, there might be a lot more going on. And is there can we, implement like daily check-ins where they have to maybe fill out something like, I'm feeling like this, and the teacher can maybe like anonymously check in with them. Like, what are some things that you've seen teachers do or have encouraged teachers to do in their classrooms so that they can help those kids as much as they can to get to the learning?
The first thing that every teacher should do is kind of form a bond with their students. And obviously it's easier said than done with some students.
Okay.
And some students, you'd like form a connection that first day.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the students who often need that connection more than anyone else are the ones that it's hardest to form that connection with. But that's the first thing, is to kind of form that connection so that the student's willing to talk, if not talk to you about everything, at least let you know they're having trouble. Second thing I would do is definitely create some sort of safe environment where students do feel like it's okay to talk about this. Like, my math teacher isn't going to lose his mind if I go to him and say I didn't get my homework done because I was, really worried I had a rough night. Because a student won't come to a teacher if they think the reaction is going to be yelling at you about the homework, as opposed to how can I help you?
Ooh, right.
But then once you've established those kind of the blanket ground foundation, so to speak, the next thing is exactly what you were talking about, those daily check-ins. And there are formal ways to do it. And I've seen some great ones where like on a whiteboard, a teacher will have different, good day, bad day, awful day kind of thing. And students go put a Post-it note where they are, where it's anonymous, like nobody can know whose Post-it note is where, but a teacher could know.
Yeah, they could put their name on the back or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Or if you really want to be anonymous, you could have Google form check-ins where the student fills it out every day and just kind of lets you know how it's going. You could have a daily journal kind of activity real quick where students just do a check-in. You could also do it really informally, and I would encourage all teachers to do this, of just a kind of a greeting in the morning and just do an informal check. Who looks a little more off today than they normally do? Who looks like they're really struggling? And that's not requiring much on the part of the student. It is requiring the teachers, to kind of keep an eye on everybody and check in with everybody. And you have to form that connection to do it. But I think those are just some ideas of how you can check in with students each day.
Yeah, and if they notice it, they are able to make adjustments too, and get the rest of the class going on something, and maybe lean down close to that student, maybe, and kind of ask how you doing or whatever, and get kind of to recognize like, okay, clearly something's going on with this student, and I need to make sure I have some type of face-to-face contact. But you're right, we got to make those connections and build those relationships first. And then the teachers can do it. And it's so funny because I feel like elementary teachers are really good at this and have that opportunity because they have that like morning, like circle time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But secondary teachers, it just seems so odd because like they don't have like a rug, you know, like we don't go and sit around the rug, but they could still kind of have a morning meeting. There's nobody has said to a secondary teacher like, oh nope, you can't have morning meetings. Like you still have some type of bell work, warm up, check in, something
Right.
where you can look at your kids and, you know, if you know them well enough, you're going to see the kid that's, you know, zoning out all of a sudden or just, you know, I mean, I've had students literally ask me, come up to me and crying and say, may I have a moment to go to the restroom? Right. And then I'm like, what do I do? Because I clearly know the student's upset, but then also I have like 35 other kids that I have to take care of. In those things, what are the best ways to approach like that type of situation at the secondary level?
Right. So you're talking about morning meetings, and at the secondary level, it doesn't even have to be that formal. And it's tricky because as a secondary teacher, you got what, 5 minutes between classes, and you're trying to check emails and everything
Yeah.
else. But if you could not do that,
Yeah.
and greet students that are coming through the door, so you're like making eye contact with them, you're saying hi, glad to
Love
see
that.
you. That gives you just a split second to just kind of take a temperature and see if somebody's off, to see if they're wearing it on their face, they're totally stressed, they've had a fight with their boyfriend and they're losing it, you know. So you can kind of get that quick read. And then you mentioned earlier about following up with them in a nice, quiet, confidential way, like, everything okay, anything I can help with? Give them an opportunity to do that. Those are the quick and easy ways. You're absolutely right though with the bell work, the 5 minute warm up. It's easier in some classes than it is in other. You know, a daily journaling activity in English makes total sense.
Right.
A little more difficult to pull that off in Algebra 2 or geometry. But those frequent conversations, how was your evening? You know, how's everybody doing? And then kind of read the room a little bit.
Yeah. I used to do it while I was taking attendance. So if I had them doing some type of activity at the beginning and I was taking attendance, I would look to see if they were there, but I would also look to see if they were there. Like,
Right.
are you all here today? Like, are you just like functioning like you normally do? Are you talking to your friends? Are you doing the activity, or are you withdrawn? Are you, tired? Are you wearing your hoodie over your head where you don't normally do that type of stuff? That's kind of what I would usually do it. And I think that's an easy way too, to do a quick check. If you're scrambling and you can't get to the door, which I always love to be by the door too, but once those kids are settled and seated, it's really easy if you have that theme chart to kind of put a little tick mark or something about the kids that you want to go check in with once the lesson starts to roll and go.
Absolutely. And that's the best way to do it, is to, again, know what their typical functioning is, how they normally look, how they normally act. And then when it's off, when it's different, that's when they really need a little bit of a follow-up.
One thing that my daughter's teacher does this year, and she's in 3rd grade, and I wasn't even ready for this as a mom, but she gives the kids every day a sheet of paper with a bunch of faces on it, like emojis.
Yep.
And in the morning, they cut out the morning, how they feel when they get to school. They cut out that one, and they put it on their desk. And then after recess, which is like after lunch, they cut out another one about how they're feeling. And then they cut out the last one right before they pack up. And she sent it out in a parent letter and said, this is kind of how I do a check on how they're doing socially and emotionally throughout the day. And then as a parent, I get those 3 smiley faces or those 3 emojis in the folder at the end of each day. And I love that as a parent because I actually can go to my kid and say, I noticed that today you started off sad in the morning. What was going on? And she goes, Mom, I really was upset because somebody said something to me on the playground. And now I have like this dialogue with my kid that I wouldn't have had that teacher not facilitated that for me.
And that's a fantastic idea. I love it. As a student, I mean, I don't know what the setup in the room is like, so I don't know how confidential these emojis are. And
Yeah, I don't either,
yeah,
to be honest.
no, and as primary grades, it wouldn't necessarily matter as much.
Yeah,
They
high
aren't
school,
necessarily,
secondary, yeah.
yeah, they aren't necessarily looking over at their neighbor's desk to see what the, sad face emoji is.
hmm But
And
they could do it on a Google form or something like that,
right,
or circle it on the end, like on the warm up or something maybe, that they turn in.
you're absolutely right that providing that feedback to the parent as a source of dialogue and follow up is fantastic. So you're facilitating communication that way.
Yeah, because I was shocked by that this year, and I thought in my secondary brain, I was like, oh, like how could I have done that with my high school kids, where I was able to send that because it's great for me as a teacher, but then to know it as a parent is also very powerful too. So,
It absolutely is. And this is a great difference between elementary and secondary. So elementary kids, they expect you to tell their parents, and they are happy you have, and they're fun to talk. They're happy to talk to their parents about it. I have
hmm
and I've got a first grader who would be fine with me asking how his day was and tell me all
right.
about it. I also have a senior that if a teacher emailed me and said she expressed these feelings, would be a little annoyed that they had confided in the teacher. So it's,
Yeah,
um,
right.
teachers are in a tough spot about like, what do I tell a parent? What do I not tell a parent? It's tricky sometimes.
Right, because they've built up a trust with their teacher, and they want to make sure. Yeah, they're like, no, don't tell my mom about whatever, right? But
Right.
obviously, if it's something of concern, they need to share that
Absolutely. Yeah,
information. Yeah,
you're right.
for sure. Okay, I just wanted to bring that up and get your thoughts on it because I just thought, oh, a sheet of faces. Like I just would never ever have thought of that. So, but I guess the end goal would be that the teacher, no matter what they use, responds immediately, and that shows that they're building trust with the kid, right? Like they value, like if you do use some type of system, don't ignore the system, right?
You are right. If you're going to ask the student for input about how they're feeling and how they're doing, you've got to do something with that information. And
Okay.
so don't ask if you're not going to do anything about it. But we definitely want teachers asking. We want them
hmm
um, connecting with those students and worrying about, not necessarily worrying about, but being concerned about their social emotional growth and well-being.
Yeah, because we know I mean, as an educator, if you're not mentally with me, like you said, that if a girl or a boy or whoever came in and they broke up with somebody and that is like their world, they're not listening to my Romeo and Juliet lecture. Like it's just not happening. Like, so they are in a different space. So we have to somehow figure out how to get them to a place where they can take in some information into that um, prefrontal cortex and not stay in that limbic system, I guess, that hyperactive area. And so one of the things that you mentioned was creating a safe space. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So when you're talking about a safe space, are you asking about like a safe place for them to share their feelings? Or are you talking about a safe place, like a quiet corner in a classroom they can go to?
Kind of both, because like, I've seen calming corners in elementary schools and I love them. There's like Play-Doh in there and there's books and like happy pictures of pets and like all this awesome stuff. But then I go into, the secondary rooms and it's like, well, the classroom's comfortable, but like, I don't see like a senior being like, I need to go into the tent now. Like, so,
Correct.
right. Like, I don't want to go into the calming tent. Like, so I guess talk about it in both of those ways. Like, how can we create these safe spaces?
Yeah. Well, across all grade levels, elementary, secondary, the generic safe space is that you're open to talking about feelings. You're open to listening to students when they are upset. You're not freaked out if a student comes to you and says, I'm really upset and I need somebody to talk to. You know how to have a brief conversation with them about them and then get them somewhere if they need more support. So if they
Mm-hmm.
need to go to the counselor, you know when to make that call.
Okay.
Um, and that's easier sometimes at the elementary level where you can talk to them for just a minute and redirect them and then they're okay.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the high school when someone comes in crisis and And I don't mean crisis in the sense that they're threatening suicide, but they've had a really traumatic lunch and you're not bringing them back in the next minute and a half.
No.
It may be that they do need to go to the counseling officer. If you've identified someone on campus that they can talk to, you can get them to that person.
Okay.
So all those are safe spaces, so to speak, and that you've created a plan, and you've talked to the students about that, and you're okay with all of that. A not safe space in that same sort of idea is someone who immediately glosses over it and just points at the student's seat and says, I need you to get to work. That student's not going to feel safe coming to that teacher. And so we don't necessarily want that. Now, you're right at the at the secondary level. I can't imagine a senior or even a freshman saying, hey, let's take a moment and go into the calming corner. But those kind of calming corners, those flexible seating arrangements that you have at elementary level, especially, they're great if they're used appropriately. And you kind of have to work with the kids about when to use it, how to use it. Set some limits about how long they can be in there. Because there will be students at all levels that'll be like, I'm going to receive my education this year from the calming corner. And you can't really have that, right? So, but they are great spaces for kids who just need to take a minute. And at the secondary level, taking a minute can be just running to the restroom for a minute. At the elementary level, it's great if we can keep them in the class so we're not sending them down to the nurse for half the day. If they can redirect themselves in that calming corner in just a couple minutes, that's even better. So.
Yeah, and I think it's also good if modeling that it's okay not to be okay. So like as a teacher, I could say like, oh, I had this. I mean, I remember even just being really vulnerable with my high school kids. And when my son was 1 and he was in daycare, and like, I didn't sleep last night because he's got hand, foot, and mouth, which is really gross. And I literally I can't function right now. And so I'm going to need a minute, just to get it together. You guys keep working. And I think by modeling those behaviors of it's okay not to be okay all the time, adults feel this too, helped my kids come to me sometimes when they were feeling like I'm not okay right now. And I know that's hard for a lot of adults because it's hard to be like super vulnerable in front of a group of kids, but I do think they begin to trust you and you become more credible in their eyes if you take the time to give them. And it was like a 2-minute story. I didn't lose really much of my class period teaching time, but I gained so much credibility and trust with my kids by just letting them into my life for just a second, and just saying, look, I just had a really rough night and I just need to take a minute, and I'll be back in just a minute. And I think they appreciated that honesty.
And they absolutely did. And you also modeled for them how you can not be okay for a minute and take a moment and get yourself back into a good space.
Take a breath.
And they need to see that as well. If they think an adult is perfect all the time, they don't know that it's okay not to be okay, and then how to get out of it when you're struggling.
So I was just thinking, like, especially if a kid at home always feels like they have to be okay or something, like, you know what I mean? Maybe their home life is really like it's very strict or structured. It's nice to have a teacher. I remember having a teacher just being like, oh, I'm really stressed out because blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, you're stressed out? Like what? Like, you know what I mean? Like it was rare when I was in school for a teacher to talk about themselves, not super personal or anything like that, but just like, give enough to the students to bond and build a relationship.
Correct. And a lot of our students now are facing so much pressure at home to be perfect, whether it's test scores or athletic accomplishments or all of the above, that it's okay for them to know that they don't have to succeed at everything, especially not the first time they try. It's okay to
Right.
make a mistake. It's okay to have a bad day. And there are ways to come back from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you always have the next day, and working that into the lessons, just organically through storytelling, or chunking your lessons into shorter bursts so that they're not feeling like they're just overwhelmed or overrun with information. Getting them up and moving, playing music, all those things I'm sure probably help a little bit with some of those kids that just feel like, oh, I just can't, I'm slugging through.
They do really help. One of the, I have a seventh grader, but one of his best teachers he had, his third grade teacher, built in brain breaks into the lessons every day. And it wasn't anything fancy. They would build these breaks in throughout the day where they got an opportunity to socialize, eat a snack, but it was in the
Nice.
classroom. So they weren't,
Right.
we're not doing 90 minutes of instruction straight at the age of 8. They're breaking it up. And so it really worked well for him. And I think for a lot of the students in the class.
Well, and I will say this on this podcast until I die, I guess, or until this podcast ends, but that kids can only handle information for their age in minutes, and I would suggest even less, probably. So, yeah, if they're 8, you've got 8 minutes to give them information, and then they need to do something with that information, or they need to do, and that's where you can push in some movement. You could have them turn and talk to a partner. You could have them do a hand up, stand up, whatever it is that your strategies that you pull in. But yeah, and then obviously mix in sometimes those brain breaks. That time to relax and interact with peers is really important for their self-concept and self-esteem, for sure.
It is. And we talk all the time about social emotional learning, and most people think it's some magic curriculum that we have to do. And there are certainly curricula for it, but it's much more effective when you build it into the lesson, like you said, when you build it into the day. And there are opportunities.
Yeah, more organic.
Yep, there are opportunities for social emotional learning all day long. You promote those positive interactions and friendships. That's where you're the best bang for your buck.
So I read somewhere that, and I'm trying to think of where it was. It's probably on Instagram, so don't judge me. So let me know if it's not right. But it was something about like routine exposure to sunlight reduces resting heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, blood sugar, but it increases energy, strength, and endurance, lowers stress, and builds tolerance, and then also builds the ability to absorb and carry oxygen. When I read that, I thought about our classrooms and how so many of them are windowless.
Yes.
What are some things that we could do? Because I really do feel like that access to sunlight and outdoors is really important throughout the day. If you are in a classroom, even secondary, and they're in hallways and they never go outside, that's got to impact their mental health in some form, shape, or form, whether they're even realizing or not. Like I have to go on a walk or see the sky or do something and get out of my office for just a little bit, because it actually makes me more productive when I come back.
And I think what you read is absolutely right. I should say that.
Okay. It's a great
yes,
Instagram post. I'll find it.
You should favorite that or something. But I think one of the things, historically, kids, even if they were in school all day, and classrooms not having windows isn't necessarily a new thing.
No.
But once they got out of school, they were often outside for hours on end, or at least more than they are now. I think kids now, either through jobs or free time activities, be it video games, social media, technology.
Yeah. Oh, social media, yeah.
Yeah, they're just
as I reference Instagram.
Right. But they're much less likely to go outside and spend time outside. And I think we've got, and this goes for adults too, we all tend to be stuck inside more than we used to be. And so you're absolutely right. You're able to take a break and take a walk outside and see the sky. kids, it's hard to build that into a day for a teacher to, even at the
It
elementary
is.
level, you got recess, but more than that, it's difficult to get them outside, or it's 116 degrees. So
Mm-hmm.
lunch recess is canceled, PE's not happening outside.
Right.
But I do think teachers could, even if you, as much as you can get them outside during the day, that's great. Communicating with families about the need to get outside, and maybe have some activity. I'm not a big believer in homework necessarily, but activities they could do at home that involve going outside and finding things, exposing them to the sun, to the outdoors. We're all vitamin D deficient, I think, to a certain degree, which has
Right.
a big impact
Yeah.
on our well-being as well.
Yeah, and on our mood. Yeah, and I mean, when I hear about recesses getting taken away, I'm like, no, we need more recess. Just like more recess in littler spans. Like I don't need like a 45-minute recess. Like can we have like little 10-minute recesses? I used to, when it was nice out, in Arizona, it's very like just kind of that little gap, but November to January-ish. I would take my students out for just walk and talks. And so I would give them some type of prompt and just say, okay, I need you to kind of walk outside and we're going to all kind of go together, and you're going to have a partner. We're going to walk and talk about this concept. So we're still learning. Of course, did I know they were going to talk about that for 5 seconds and then talk about whatever else? Absolutely. But it didn't take that much time. And then when they came back in, I stood at the door. And when they came in, before they were able to go back to their seats, I would say to them, hey, what did you guys talk about when it came to blah, blah, blah? And they would have that answer and they would sit down, and then we could have a full conversation as a class then about our walk and talk outside. I wasn't able to do it as often as I would like to, but it was at least an opportunity for me to get them some sunlight and get them out and moving, and just change the channel in their brain a little bit to something like different. And I think it refreshed them and re-energized them to come back into the class more like ready to learn.
It probably did. I mean, especially if it was, say, fourth hour and they had fifth hour lunch, they're at the tail end of what they're able to handle in a stretch. So getting a little bit of a break is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even like morning air and first and second hour was kind of
Hmm.
pleasant,
Right.
like.
When I was at
Mhm.
Gilbert High, it didn't happen all the time, but it wasn't unusual to see some of the English teachers having class outside. Our high schools have some space around where they could pull that off. Again, short window of the year when you can do that, but it was nice.
But take advantage of it when you can, I guess, wherever you're at, wherever you're listening from, because some people have snow that they're dealing with. We don't have that, but we have extreme heat. So,
True.
um, yeah. Okay, so those are some ways that we can kind of help those kiddos that we see are struggling get to a place where, okay, we can learn. We've checked in with them. We've given some opportunities for movement. We've kind of created a safe space or a calming corner if they're they're a little bit littler, some brain breaks. My next question is, we know that the research says that a student will see themselves as a learner in a specific class or content area is hugely impactful on their mental health. So if they see themselves, or at some point in their educational career, someone said, or they have said, I am bad at math, I don't like to read, that it just kind of sticks. And so, of course, we as teachers can't control how they see themselves in other areas of their lives. But if we know this kid hates math, or this kid hates reading, or this kid dislikes PE, or whatever it is, if we know that, why are they falling through the cracks, do you think, still? Like, because I know that research, I know a lot of kids come to me and they're like, reading's not my thing. And I'm like, that's cool, but we've got some books we're going to go through, and I'm going to be there for you, and we're going to do some awesome activities with it. Where are we? Do we have a stigma as a society when it comes to mental health? Are we not cultivating a culture of mental health in our schools? Like, what is it that we can do to make these kiddos and these learners feel successful, if nothing else, in our rooms?
So That's a pretty complicated question.
So
No,
sorry.
no,
Yes,
it's totally fine, but it's multifaceted because
it
you've
is. It's totally
you've
multifaceted.
got a couple different issues. One is self-concept related to learning. So the math one,
Yes.
the example you gave, you've got a huge culture of math anxiety that's existed forever. So that students, once they determine I'm not any good at math, they are less likely to try it. And if they're less likely to try it, or if more likely to give up once they do try and they experience a little bit of difficulty, it's impossible to make progress.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only way to improve someone's self concept is for them to be successful at activities they perceive as challenging.
Mm.
So you can't just give them easy, busy work and have them be successful. It's not going to do anything. And if you give them work that's too hard, they shut down immediately. So you got to find the nice balance in there, so that it's appropriately challenging. They're able to be successful, and then that self concept will start to come up. But bigger than that is the whole mental health issue. So that if students aren't comfortable talking about why they don't want to try it, or why they feel the way they feel, they're either at an elementary level maybe just going to act out. The math worksheets come out, or the math instruction starts, and the kid starts getting out of his seat and leaving the classroom, or worst case scenario, flipping desks and everything else. And it
Right,
may,
which happens. I mean, time tests bring out the worst in me.
yes, because your stress goes through the roof. And now imagine you're a second grader with little impulse control and no executive functioning and a history of trauma. That desk is going to get turned over.
Totally. Yeah.
um, so recognizing that is kind of the first step, that it's not a behavior issue. We're dealing with stress and trauma and mental health, and so we need to treat it differently.
Okay.
We need to create some safe spaces. We need to prep the student for what's coming. We need to work with them to start to build up those skills and that self-concept, so that he or she is able to react better in those situations.
And maybe give them different opportunities or different ways to show their mastery of a skill that isn't as anxiety inducing to them.
Oh, correct. Like, it doesn't mean you have, there's nothing that says everybody has to take the same time test or has to do the same book. There are ways we can do some alternative curriculum or different activities, or if a student doesn't want to write their answer, if you're able to talk to them, and if writing, for example, is what triggers them, if they're able to give you their answer orally, then that'll work. If they can show that they've mastered the skill, then let's do it that way.
Because I think that was what I learned really late in my career, was the way to foster a culture that values the student's mental health was to give them more options of how they showed me that they can master a concept. Like, I want to do like speeches in my class, but I have two kids that are petrified of doing a speech. Absolutely. Then I just need, they wrote it, but then they were like, can I just give it just to you one-on-one at lunch? Yes. Like, not every kid's going to be a public speaker. Like, it's okay. Like, I just, and other teachers are like, no, they have to get up and they have to do it. And for me, it was more about, they can do it. The speech is brilliant. It's more of them just doing it in front of others.
I think you're definitely onto something. Younger teachers or teachers who are newer to the field, well, teaching is hard in general, let me say that. But teachers who are new feel like the one thing they can do to make it controllable is to be in charge of everything. And that if everybody will do exactly what I say, then I can control the environment and it will go like it's supposed to go and everybody will learn.
And I'm a good teacher if everybody's doing the same thing at the same time in the same way.
Yes. And it takes a little while. You have to get a little more comfortable in your own skin in front of the classroom to know that it's okay if that doesn't happen. And you have to figure out what you're trying to get out of the lesson. So
Right.
if it's not a drama class, let's say it's history, and you've got this, you've said speech, giving speeches was the example you used, and that's a great example. But it's not drama. So the being a great orator isn't what we're looking for in history.
Right.
If you can do
Yeah.
get the concept, the kid can give it to you at lunch. They can record it now and
Right.
do it on video. Some students are fine doing it on video. That works just as well. you as a teacher realize, okay, they did exactly what I needed them to do. They understand what I want them to understand, and then that's okay.
Yeah, they mastered the skill. Hmm. Yeah, it took me a long time to realize that. And I think that's why I just wanted to mention it on the podcast with you today, because I think as a kid looking back in my education, there's times where I wish teachers would have just given me an opportunity. I always said to my parents, I'm a horrible multiple choice test taker, and I said I could, if I was able to write a paragraph of why I thought it was B, I would probably get it right, and even though it was supposed to be A. I always wished that I would have other opportunities to show what I knew besides a test, and I don't know why I didn't take that with me. I think just the fear and the anxiety of being a first, like in that new teacher zone, you're just trying to make sure, no one's throwing Pop-Tarts at other kids. And you know what I mean? Like you're just trying to do all those things, but just like
You're trying to survive.
you're trying to survive, right? And I think if we just take a step back and listen to the kids like that and foster that culture and build those relationships, actually your life's going to be a lot easier as a teacher, because your kids are going to trust you more. They're going to feel like they belong. They have a place that they can go, that they feel like they have a sense of self, and they're not going to hopefully be as anxious as I was as a student. I was always very anxious and wanted to get the good grades, and I get the scholarships and all of those things.
And I think there are a lot of kids like that, more and more now, more than ever, because everybody's all about comparing themselves and doing better than their neighbor, so to speak. So there's a lot of pressure on kids.
And social media pushes that hard, for sure.
It definitely does.
They do compare themselves on the internet to other people, and I'm like, that is totally a highlight reel of someone else's life. Please do not compare yourself to someone's best day. But yes, it is hard for kids, for sure. Okay, are you ready for rapid fire questions?
I will do my best.
Okay, all right. So number one is education is, and then you fill in the blank. So education is?
Very important to everyone. And if appropriate supports are available, then it is kind of the great equalizer in society.
Oh, wow. You just Atticus Finch added, yeah. Then doesn't Atticus Finch say that in To Kill a Mockingbird? I should know. I'm an English teacher. But yes, education, it can be the equalizer. But again, I love that you threw in if the appropriate supports are available. Because if they're not, then it is a place where it could be completely inequitable, right? Awesome. Okay, the second one, what inspires you?
Helping people. It's kind of a cheesy answer, but
No,
really,
I like that.
Really the ability to help students, especially who struggle. That's why school psychologists exist, really, is to identify students who need support and help them get those supports. And so when you see that, and working at the high school for years, when you took a freshman and who struggled for years and years and years, and you were able to get them through their senior year and graduate, and see how happy they were and the sense of accomplishment they had, that sticks with you.
Oh, yeah, I got a little teary there. I'm glad we're not zooming. Okay, yeah, I mean it does. I mean it sticks with you, and you change your life, right? You change their course and their trajectory of where they could have gone. So that's awesome. Yeah. Okay, number 3. If you could pass on any wisdom to students, what would you share?
So my mom has a saying, and she used to say it to me all the time when I was growing up, which is, it's an old adage, mostly about baseball, but if you win some, you lose some, and some get rained out.
Awesome.
But the idea is you don't get too high about the great things. You don't get too low about the bad stuff. You just try not to get too worked up about anything. Try to stay even keeled, and it's a pretty healthy way to go through life. You obviously want to have, experience joy, and nobody wants to experience sadness, but it's a part of life, and dealing with it's acceptable. But if you can try to stay even keeled most of the time, life's pretty, it's a lot more manageable.
Right. Okay, so can you tell me how to do that? No, I'm just kidding. But I love that. I'm going to keep that. I actually love the some get rained out because there are days where I'm like, yep, that's a wash. We're just going to pretend that day didn't happen.
Start over.
Yep, just start over the next day. So I love that. Okay. All right. Number 4, what are your must-have smartphone apps?
So I like the Calm app is great for self-care, and there's some offshoots of it. They have different things you can do with it.
I have Headspace, and I like that, but I haven't tried Calm.
Calm, yeah, calm.com. And there's a free version.
Oh, cool.
So those are great, and there's lots of different ones. There's some other ones if you need some help getting to sleep. There's Rain, where it just plays nature sounds. So any of those kind of relaxation apps are good. What I use my smartphone for, unfortunately, is more of a lot of Twitter, Facebook, Netflix, stuff like that.
Well, yeah. Like I just mentioned, I got some type of psychology off of Instagram. So you're in good company. So don't feel bad for that. But I think having a mix is good, right? As long as we're not living in Netflix or whatever.
Right. Definitely. I use the Google app all the time too, for whatever reason. I think that's the third most used app on my phone.
I'm pretty sure that's on mine too. Because, I mean, what do we do before we had Google? I kind of remember. It's like, I faintly remember card catalogs, like at the library. So, okay. Number 5, what song do you know all the lyrics
to? None, actually. I can't sing at all.
Okay.
There are those games you play where they'll play a few bars and you're supposed to identify the song. They play it at conferences now. That's like a thing. I'm awful at it.
You're like, please stop. I don't like this.
Yeah. Nobody wants me on their team. I need to hear the whole chorus and then I might be able to get it. That's not my thing. My family and I do a lot of road trips across the country, and this summer we listened to the Hamilton soundtrack a lot, so I do know most of the songs to that, but I couldn't sing them for you.
That soundtrack. Yeah, Skylar Sisters. Oh my gosh, my daughter is Peggy on the way to school. It's really bad, and she's like only 9. I don't know if that's a good parenting thing, but she plays Peggy and I play Angelica. Okay, that was awesome. All right, if listeners want to learn more from you and mental health in general and how to help students, because we kind of blur that line. We talked a lot about mental health and social emotional learning today. Where can they find that information?
So the websites for the Arizona Association of School Psychologists, the National Association of School Psychologists, both of those websites have a ton of resources.
Okay.
CASEL, which is CASEL, which has a lot of information about social emotional learning, is another great website.
Okay, awesome. I've used CASEL a lot, but I haven't looked at the other ones. I'm going to look at those. Okay, and then could they email you at your Gilbert Schools account if they've got any other specific questions that they have about implementing some of these ideas in their classroom?
Of course. matthew.moix at gilbertschools.net. You can email me and I'll happily answer any questions I can.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on and chatting with me today about this. I just feel like it's such an important topic. I think a lot of teachers will benefit from just knowing that it's okay to implement and weave in these things. I know they feel like they have so much to get through with their content, but it is so important to get kids in a place mentally, in a healthy place mentally before they can really reach the content. So I think it's an important conversation, and I appreciate you being here today to do that with me.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Learning Unlocked and finding out more about mental health and its effect on our students and their learning. I absolutely loved some of the actionable steps that Matt mentioned about when you see a kiddo in distress, of how to contact the counselor or the school psychologist or the nurse, and just how to create that safe space as a teacher, and that it's okay not to be okay all the time. I think those are just important points in having that healthy balance that he talked about. I for sure need to work on that myself. So I think it was a really great conversation, and I got a lot out of it, and I hope you did too. If you listen today as a GPS educator, you can receive PD recertification credit by visiting our Employee Hub page and navigating to professional growth and then digital PD courses. Just a reminder that we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GPS Prof Growth. That's GPS PROF GROWTH. For more information or resources from this episode, please visit our website at learningunlocked.libsyn.com/website. Libsyn is spelled LIBSYN. We are distributed by Libsyn to Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Audible. Episodes are also available on our PGD YouTube channel under playlists. Our intro and outro music are licensed from Melody Loops. And just a quick reminder, if you can write us a review on Apple Podcasts, I would so appreciate it. The more reviews and ratings we get from educators like you, the more educators will see our podcast pop up on their feed. And so if you like what you're hearing and think others would too, please head over and provide a review. Thanks again, key holders. Keep unlocking that curiosity and creativity and innovation with your students. Create that safe space for those kids, and just stay kind and courageous. I'll see you next time.